Yes, it's that time of the day, Mike.
Let's do that. We've got a pretty tight timeline and we'll kind of get started. So officially, good morning / good afternoon, and welcome to our first CRRA Edible Food Recovery Technical Council presentation. So we appreciate you joining us. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's been a part of this, the executive committee. I'm going to read off the names and I wrote them down because I didn't want to forget anybody and embarrass anyone, especially myself. So first of all, kudos to Mauricio Cordova, Lisa Coelho, Meredith Knowles, Tracy Bills in carrying the load for me. They've done an amazing job. Also, Julia Heath and Monica White, Casey Bartholomew, Annika Anderson, Rachel O'Terre, Kat LaRoe and Robin Martin, Patty Iyer, Adriana Hernandez, and Colleen Foster. And if I butchered anybody's name, I apologize. And if I forgot anybody, I apologize as well. So let's kind of go head on to the next slide and we'll get started on some housekeeping items if you don't mind. First of all, if you're not speaking, make sure you mute your button or hit your mute button, of which I will have to probably be the worst offender. Polling questions are going to be asked periodically, so yeah, be prepared to see those come up and answer those. Please use the chat feature to ask questions. Questions and answers will be moderated as time permits. Also, additional questions will be answered on the website. And then finally, webinars will be recorded and posted to our website as well. So without any further ado, I want to turn this over to Tracy Bills.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm super excited to be a part of this first webinar. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to hop off, so I guess I'll have to watch the recording. But I just want to let everybody know that this is a very newly established Edible Food Recovery Technical Council. It was started in July. It's only been 3.5 months. They already have finalized their charter. They already have their work plan and budget, and they're already doing this webinar. So you can obviously see the excitement, enthusiasm of the content and the people that are really participating in it. And I think what's also really exciting is that this group is very diverse. So it comes from all kinds of parts of the food recovery organizations, different parts of the industry. And so I think that's what really makes this TC unique and so hands-on. Just a little bit about CRRA. We are the largest and oldest statewide recycling association focused on education and ending waste, zero waste. We have 11 technical councils varying in a variety of topics. So as Michelle had mentioned, there's the Organic Council, we have a Construction Demolition Council, we have K through 12. And to be a part of the TC, you must be a CRRA member. So just to let people know what that is, what is involved in that, I can't talk today. $200 a year for membership, $100 for nonprofits, and then we also have a free student membership. And then we have 2 times a year, we have scholarships. So it's $100 off membership. So if you're interested in that, apply for the scholarship. And the benefits of being a CRRA member is that you get a discount on the CRRA conference, as well as the Zero Waste CRRA SWANA certification program, free attendance to webinars. You're actually a free member of the National Recycling Coalition, so you get a membership there and discounts on their conference, which actually is going to be the second week in December. And then lastly, you get to participate up to 3 technical councils. So if you're interested about becoming a member, if you're not already, let me know. But I really appreciate everything that this technical council is doing. You guys are amazing. You're total rock stars. And with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So Mauricio, if you would like to do us a favor, Mauricio Cordova is going to walk us through what our mission statement is. If you don't mind, Mauricio, if you want to walk through that.
Well, the main part of our mission statement, I mean, you're kind of looking at it there, is very important. We're here to try to work with everybody and set up, find sustainable food systems, the nation's dignified distribution, partnership resources of edible food. As we know, with AB 1383 coming online, is a very important topic. Plus, we're wasting a lot of food out there. So this is a very topic that is very dear to all of us that are part of this part. And, we want to make sure that we're fighting food insecurity and food waste. That is without getting into a lot of details, that is the main part of our mission. We're very excited of being here and being part of this new TC. And next, I'm going to share with you some of our goals. Next slide, please, Meredith. So we have defined found 4 things that we feel are very important, 4 goals. One of them, which is a very big one, defined food recovery. That is an animal all by itself, because that is very different to everybody that participates on any food type of food recovery. We want to identify and expand network of stakeholders and partners. So that's folks that can recover or have food for donation. So we're trying to figure out how do we bring them all together into one maybe kind of database or location where we can communicate. Identify funding sources to achieve the goals. So all these organizations that are involved in both sides, either providing food and or recovering it, well, we need money to do it, right? We're happy to get the food, but we need to find ways to fund these great programs and make them sustainable. The last one will be define food recovery best practices and protocols. And this one's a very important one, because we need to elevate that part of the food donation culture and process, right? And make sure that the food is safe, both on the producer side as well as the folks that are recovering and distributing it. So these are the 4 goals that as a committee, we felt that was the most critical and important parts to kind of get us going forward with this technical council. And the first, we're going to have today 4 presentations, one for each one of our subcommittees, which are leading a particular goal, as we see here. But before we get to do that, do we have any questions about any of these goals? And there's something that we can kind of go over for these ones. Nope, nothing in the chat. We have no questions yet. Good. All right, we'll move forward. Back to you, Meredith. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with our digital communications.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Meredith Knowles. I am the Digital Communications Chair. Sorry. So there's a couple of ways that you can interact with us. First, I would like to point out that the Edible Food Recovery Technical Council has a website as part of the CRRA website. So all of the technical councils, as you are probably familiar with, have their own pages. So what you can expect to find there is a recap of our mission statement and our goals. And you'll also be able to find updated information every month. So you'll find the minutes from our technical council meetings. You will find recordings of all of our webinars. So we're recording this and it will be posted. Any relevant news and community stories we'll be sharing there. You'll also be able to communicate with us directly. Of course, if you know anyone on the technical council, please feel free to email them directly. But we do have a direct email that comes to us, efrcouncil@gmail.com. So if you're not sure how to reach out to anyone, you can certainly email us through that and it will go to the right person. And also on our website, you will find an interactive forum. So there will be ongoing discussions related to what comes out of our meetings, what comes out of our webinar, and you can post questions in there and have a public discussion for all members. You can also find us on social media. We are young on that presence, but we have a Facebook and an Instagram page. So please go like those, build some traction, because we will be able to share a lot of information that way, bring it to your organizations and help build that up. Following today's webinar, we will be posting a survey. This is the link to it. We can also put it in the chat. And by the end of today, you will be emailed this survey just to give us a little bit more information about who's listening and how the council can respond to the larger public as well. So that is what's happening on our communications front. I will also be throughout this webinar posting polling questions. So if you have any questions or answers that aren't part of that, you can put them in the chat. Definitely need to to all of the technical features that come with the online world. But I will be running that. And if you don't find your answer or need to ask something else, please definitely put that in the chat throughout the webinar today.
Perfect. Thank you. If we don't have any questions right now, do we have any that we want to take at this moment?
Yes. So I would actually like to post 2 questions. One, just as much as we're introducing ourselves, we'd love to know who's listening. So what industry are you working in? And if you could put that in the chat, we actually don't have enough answer boxes for that. If you could put that in the chat, we'd love to see that publicly. I see some popping up. And while that is going, I would also like to post this question. Does SB 1383 impact your professional work in some way? We'll give you a couple minutes to answer that. All right. So that's an overwhelming yes. We were curious who was going to be listening today, but that is definitely yes. And I will be posting more questions throughout. But for now, let's go to our first.
Excellent. So thank you, Meredith. And we're very excited to have everybody here today. And thank you for sharing your information on the chat. It's very important to us to find out. Today is really about discovering who's out there, who's doing what, and how can we make it better to lead this group, in the direction that works for everybody, not only for ourselves, but we want to make sure that we are sharing and looking at the information that is important to everybody in this food recovery community. Our first mini presentation for today is to define food recovery. And for that, I'm going to cue Patty Iyer from Daily Bowl in the Fremont Union City area. Patty, tell us a little bit about defining food recovery.
Thank you, Mauricio. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patty Iyer. We're part of the subcommittee with Mauricio and Lisa Curlo, and we're going to be talking about defining food recovery. See, food recovery, it's the similarities really between what is food recovery and what is food waste, the diversion. Food recovery really is a process for rescuing edible food and distributing that to food insecure population instead of being sent to landfill. We have all seen it around. And why do we need to have food recovery? There's visible factors. There's also the data that goes with that. 40% of all food produced goes to waste. And it's the food waste is the third largest greenhouse gas emitter after the US and China. And the World Wildlife Fund had done a study, and they found that the production of wasted food is equivalent to greenhouse gas emission from 37 million cars. Now, this is before the electric cars and everything came into vogue, so we can take that as a good model right there. And the Americans waste on an average of about $161 billion each year on food. And if you really take it, if you narrow it down to a cross section of the family, a family of 4 throws out $1,600 worth of produce every year. And you know what? I have been guilty of that too at times, so that's a good statistic right there. So I think at this point of time, it's very, I think the etiquette demands that I ask you a joke or I tell a joke. So what did one fermented grape say to the other? It says, aha, you're wasted. Okay. So that brings me to the caveat right here. Okay. Food recovery should not be seen as an alternate to composting at the donor sites. In the sense, food rescue organizations should not be known as a food dumping organization, right? I coined a hashtag, and that really sums up food recovery very well. It's hashtag from waste to table, right? So we rescue and we divert it to the table. So with that, what do we do with that? We recover food to feed people or feed animals, and what types of food do we recover? I mean, our organization, we recover almost all sorts of food that is edible. We prepared food, produce in terms of fruits and vegetables, groceries in terms of rice, flour, lentil, grains, etc. Processed groceries. When I say processed, it means like the canned food and that is prepackaged and stuff. Shelf-stable items, bread, granola bars, and healthy snacks, and of course, dairy, and of course, protein in terms of eggs or meats. And in my case, because I'm a vegetarian, tofu for me, I'll take it. Okay. So these are the kind of food that can be recovered. In sense, the gamut spans everything that can be put onto a table. Okay. And the we have to kind of who benefits from all this? The hungry and food insecure individuals, and the donors really feel good when they donate the edible food rather than throwing it into the compost bins. And of course, in a social world, the planet is really happy because it saves the natural resources as well as reduce pollution. Um, any questions here so far? Okay. Mauricio, would you like to add something to that?
No, I think you cover all of it. I mean, some of it, like I said, it's, I think actually we do have a question from Colleen Foster.
Sure.
So she was mentioning that, go ahead, Rachel, sorry.
No problem. She was making a comment saying that she would strongly not call food recovery waste to table. That backfired. Also, isn't food recovery more than just feeding food insecure? Food recovery in its purest form is feed people, not landfills.
Yeah. Actually, that I have to plead mea culpa on that waste to table, because it's just something that I found very interesting. And in that sense, it's just for me. It's not for the general usage, but to me, that kind of sums up what we can do in terms of feeding food insecure, food recovery. And actually, she's right. In its purest form, it is just diverting everything away and finding optimum uses for that. And when we also have to talk about our regulatory goals, and we have to identify who are the businesses in a tier 1, so various tiers impacted by that, and how do we provide guidance for promoting food recovery, and who are all the businesses that can be in the respective tiers. It could be grocery stores or farmers markets or farms or restaurant distributors or restaurants and institutional kitchens and all that sort of thing. So there is a lot of ground to cover. It's a wonderful field to be and to define what we have to do. So
All right. Thank you, Patty. Like I said, this definition is very broad and it means a lot of different things to different folks. Lisa, I think you had something you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in that these are our overall goals. We definitely want to promote a systematic and holistic perspective, meaning we are feeding people, there are faces. Like Patty said, it's not just an alternative to waste, and that really echoes what Michelle Young and Colleen are saying. We really want to find the commonalities between regulatory goals and waste reduction in feeding people, and also the differences. And with looking at compliance for 1383, how are we going to comply, but also consider the sensitivity of the food recovery landscape, and be sensitive to the food industry, what makes sense with regional approaches, with chain businesses, how can we leverage these different points? So we say all this, that this is just an introduction. We'd love for you to join us. This is really an opportunity to shape where the future of this subcommittee goes and how we go about defining what food recovery means to all of us. So we're not here with all the answers yet. We're inviting you to please join us and help us find those answers.
All right.
Wonderful.
Any other questions?
Do we have any other? Okay. So it is critical. I just shared with someone on the chat. We actually had a city manager once ask us, how is it safe to rescue food from a landfill? So the messaging is going to be critical, and the definitions of exactly what is food waste is going to be critical. And as mentioned, we want everybody's assistance in that. So if we can, we're going to go to our next subcommittee, which is the identify funding sources, which, as we all know, is the most critical component to this. We can identify, we can do all this legwork, but we need to be able to identify funding sources. We are lucky to have both Monica White and Julia Heath with us as our committee leaders on this. And I'd like to turn it over to them to walk through what they're doing.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Mike. My name is Julia Heath. I work with the City of Oakland. Monica White and Lisa Coelho will also be assisting achieve the goals for this subcommittee. And thank you, Lisa, for pointing out that these goals are really in the making, and we would love as much feedback as we can get from everybody who's listening right now. These are just the goals that we came up with to identify and share funding opportunities, which I think is the most obvious and basic one. We can create a database filled with grant opportunities, but we wanted to think a little bit bigger than just sharing those things with you, and to see what else we could do to help you. So we'd also like to identify and share information on successful pilots that you may want to recreate in your own jurisdictions, to share franchise agreement language and other options for funding SB 1383 compliance related activities through rate reviews or through tipping fees. And we'd like to share case studies about those options as well, to identify and share sustainable funding mechanisms. And that kind of goes even beyond just 1383 compliance, but how do we identify sustainable funding for these food distribution organizations? Because obviously feeding people is a #1 priority. And regardless of 1383, those food distribution organizations are going to require sustainable funding mechanisms. We'd also like to identify and share a database of useful apps or other software tools. I think a lot of you are already familiar with probably what's available in your area. And so we'll consolidate that in one place for people to access as they need it. We'd like to create and share ways to reduce related costs. So how can you possibly partner with other organizations or borrow or offer infrastructure to reduce some of the costs of food recovery and redistribution without reinventing the wheel or having to invest in those upfront costs of developing infrastructure. So if there's anything else that you would like to see or help us work on, please contact us with your questions, comments, or suggestions. Next slide, please. And then these are just some questions about how we can best share information with you. Does a Google Drive work? What types of file formatting would you like to see to make it most easy for you to identify the information that you require? And the same, any suggestions on what the grant funding database should include? Obviously, who is the grantor, what is the target audience, the amount, due date, and type of project or frequency of cycle. But if there's anything else that people are really looking for us to track and share, we'd love to hear that feedback. And then any suggestions also about what the app database should include. Obviously, the purpose of the app, is it paid or is it subscription based, and a link to how to download it. But if there's any other information that you would like, please let us know. And I'm going to turn it over to Monica to let her talk a little bit about the work that she's been doing and how that might be able to help you.
Thanks, Julia. So if any of you were able to join with the CRRA conference over the summer, this might be sort of repetitive, but it really speaks to a lot of the work that we've been seeing in the last few years as jurisdictions in particular are trying to reckon how are they going to prepare for the mandate that they have to provide infrastructure for edible food recovery. As Julia pointed out, we really want to look for something that's sustainable, that's flexible, that jurisdictions could take a concept and modify as needed, depending on how they're perhaps their tonnages move through communities, if there's flow control arrangements at a county level, if it's very defined in the franchise agreements and that's the way that they would like to find funding sources, or if there's collaborative or coalitions that are sort of assembling around this movement. One of the messages that I really like to talk about when we're discussing this type of sustainable funding is the concept that your resources really do need to relate to what your mission is. So it looks very different for a community that's just trying to get through 1383 and make sure their tier 1 and tier 2 generators are in compliance versus a community that's trying to tackle much broader issues of ending hunger. We definitely like to think broadly because I think it drives better innovation. It can bring different partners into the conversation that I think we're going to talk about in one of the other subcommittees that also can open up potential funding sources. So that's certainly how we would encourage it, but we definitely respect that a lot of jurisdictions are struggling with 1383 in general and may want to stay focused to the tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. Next slide, please. So part of what Julia and I have discussed in concept is really bringing together different case studies and examples that we could share. So some of them could be very simple that we've seen in the field. So as an example on the screen, Mount Diablo Resource Recovery has a really great program where once or twice a year for a month long at some defined term, they really start to broadcast to their customers, please join, please get on to electronic billing. And for every customer that joins electronic billing, they donate $1 to their food bank. This is something that's very simple, it's very generous. It supports a lot of different needs for them to get customers incentivized to join electronic bill pay, and it's highly replicable across the state. In addition, we've seen a lot of haulers as they pursue more grant funding with the Organic Infrastructure Grant, bring in edible food recovery generators. We're seeing this more in competitive bid scenarios as well, where haulers will help pay for specific infrastructure costs as a part of their competitive bid scenarios for cities. It would be great if we started seeing more cities define their needs, or perhaps define what would be most helpful in their need for infrastructure costs, whether that's a hauler to support an app or specific vehicles, specific nonprofits that they would like to help. Because as we start to get more definition within the contracts, we can start thinking a little bit broader about these long-term collection contracts and how to redefine what is organic diversion and how these partners can all start working together to tackle 1383, which we believe it's going to require partnerships across this food spectrum. Next slide, please. So we do know, and it would be very interesting if the group feels like there would be more research required here. Based on the information that we've worked on, edible food recovery is much more cost effective than sending materials to compost or anaerobic digestion. These are case studies that we've done in very specific regional locations where we've compared existing tip fees to what our gap in infrastructure is. And we've seen this approach over long term as a way to incentivize jurisdictions to really plan for edible food recovery as a part of their waste management program. We know that commercial businesses are very cost sensitive to having organic collection programs. So if there's any way to reduce that burden and that cost, we feel like it would be helpful. I'd be really curious to hear other people's feedback, if other jurisdictions have looked into this, if we started cost comparisons. But we think that a lot of work could be done here to promote this more sustainable funding source. Next slide, please. Certainly one of the things that we've seen is that the broader the collaborative, the more efficient the programs are. So as Julia mentioned, when we start bringing in jurisdictions and nonprofits and private industry, we're finding, there's potential for cost sharing on software apps where you're only, instead of each city within a county purchasing their own software program, could the county or some broader group purchase software across that spectrum that's more easily used and also becomes much easier for the reporting requirements for 1383. In addition, once we get people sort of talking more, we can find that nonprofits could support other nonprofits in a better way. So what might not be evident, and I know there's a lot of local jurisdictions on the call right now, but the current scene of edible food recovery is actually very competitive. So I hearken it back to the day before we had waste hauling franchises within a city, where we had multiple haulers working within the same area, where it's very competitive between generators, that there's a lot of uncertainty in like working collaboratively with other food agencies because there's competition for these resources. So once we can get past that, where I think the cities really need to step up and be the leaders to bring people together and either promote a collaborative or signal that they would like a collaborative approach to this, then we can release private industries and nonprofits and other agencies to sort of work together in a better way. So it's a little bit of a new concept. We have seen in some regions this worked together really, really well. It is very nuanced. There's a lot of devil in the details, but we know that this is the best way to really disseminate funds between a lot of different groups or leverage funds much better as we're working together to really tackle the broader issues of food recovery and hunger. Next slide. I think that might be it.
Great, and I actually have a polling question that I can share with the group. Give people a couple minutes. And if you haven't answered yet, 5 more seconds. And end it right there and share where we're at. So people, and I will share all of these polling questions with everyone after this as well, but definitely looks like quite a bit of variety in the audience. Thank you.
We are going to move on to the next section. We are going to move past questions, but there will be time for a Q&A at the end for this section.
Great. Okay, it looks like this is me. So I'm Robin Martin with Joint Venture Silicon Valley. And when Kat and I were thinking about what we could try to bring to the table for this best practices and protocols, we wanted it to be really practical and help support what is already happening on the ground right now. So some of what we thought we could start with was these food safety protocols. We're working on that right now in Silicon Valley with a few different groups that are working on food recovery. We're focusing on trying to have some shared safety protocols. Some of this is trying to get out ahead of 1383 and make sure that our nonprofits doing all of this wonderful work don't end up as dumping grounds for food that is no longer edible, and trying to make sure that we have good protocols out there so that donors know what is expected when donating the food. So we are looking to sort of, some of the other subcommittees have talked about how they want to create and share. We have the same idea. We're going to collect a lot of what other folks are doing around the state around these different protocols and best practices for what's happening in the field and redistribute some of that information, whether it's sort of templates of what other people's look like, or just basically here's a bunch of examples that we're collecting and then redistributing. And so we'd love more input from all over the state about what everyone's doing around these ideas. And when we started talking about food safety protocols, of course, all these other kinds of best practices come up, right? And how can we really support our nonprofits that will be in the field and do it well? And so I can let Kat chat a little bit about what we were thinking with this toolkit idea and what could be included in a toolkit.
Great, thank you, Robin. Hi, everybody. I'm Kat LaRue. I'm from the Alameda County Community Food Bank. And, around the toolkit idea, we kind of brainstormed a few options that we were thinking could be beneficial to, broader across all food recovery organizations. And so the three that we initially came to mind is around tracking, technology support, and SB 1383 compliance and implementation. But we know that's not an exhaustive list. So we'd really appreciate hearing from you to let us know, what are the areas that you might be struggling with, or where you'd like more support in terms of best practices or just other examples of things happening, within California and or across the country. I think there's a lot we can be pulling from to help develop a toolkit that'll benefit everybody across the state. So, as our fellow subcommittee members have said, we really want this to be collaborative. So if there is, information that you want to share, your training guides, your materials for us to collect and share as examples or synthesize into a larger toolkit, we would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot of great comments in the group chat here about how we define food, right, in the first place, and how we define different foods in different categories. And that's definitely something that we want to, there's the subcommittee specifically defining, what food recovery is. And we want to sort of make sure that a lot of that discussion gets applied with how we organize our protocols for different types of either donation or value added, and how we organize these toolkits or best practices into have that be influenced by all the other great work that is happening on this technical council, and make sure that influences how we organize our thoughts here. So thank you. A lot of these comments are great, and I know a lot of great work will come out of these other subcommittees to help us organize.
All right. Well, thank you, Robin. Thank you, Kat. I appreciate it. That's, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that we're still working on, and we need everybody's input. So we want everybody to continue sending their questions and comments, and we'll be able to dive in more as we move along with the committee. Mike, you want to present the next subcommittee, please?
Absolutely. One thing that's been identified over the years is that it's really critical in this space that we look at expanding those network of stakeholders. One thing we've learned is that, sometimes we are in a narrow perspective that we're comfortable with, but solutions come from all over. So a subcommittee that's going to be critical to us is a subcommittee that is going to identify the ability to expand our network of stakeholders and our partners. We have with us leading this subcommittee, Annika Anderson, again, Casey Bartholomew, and Julia Heath. So I'm going to turn it over for them to be able to walk through this for us.
Hi, yes, this is Annika Anderson. I'm from the city of Oceanside. And as Mike mentioned, I am joined by Casey and Julia, and we are trying to ensure that we can create as much accessibility and spread the word when it comes to food recovery across the state. And in doing so, a large part about creating awareness is trying to connect as much and understand who are the stakeholders involved and how we can make it as capable and accessible for them to join in that conversation, and where we can fill in gaps if there are any. Another important aspect of how we are trying to complete this work is to ensure that participants that work in the food recovery are related to each other and know of how they can work together to accomplish their shared goals. And specifically, we want to connect with more Southern California as well as Central Valley, and really the areas in California that the food is grown, because historically they have not always been involved in the conversation in a meaningful way. So really trying to prioritize how we can reach out to organizations and groups that may not necessarily have been involved in the conversations as we've been developing food recovery as a statewide policy. If you go to the next slide. So something that we did as a subcommittee going forward is trying to identify which potential stakeholders we already are aware of, and then where we can branch out and really expand the work in order to ensure that accessibility. So some traditional stakeholders that everyone may associate with food recovery includes jurisdictions, especially with SB 1383 coming into play, as well as food service businesses, including restaurants and food manufacturers, grocers, food banks, growers and farmers, schools and institutions that really are oftentimes the point of distribution for a lot of food recovery and food distribution work that's currently happening within the state, as well as the recipients of the food, right? So they're in a really important voice that needs to be included with any of these kinds of discussions. Oh,
Oh, Annika, did we lose you?
ahead and keep going. Sorry, everyone, my Zoom just died on me. So for our secondary group, we are looking at the Food Policy Council. So there's the California Food Policy Council, but there's also regional food policy councils that are all kind of intertwined and really bring a lot of those professionals into one space. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but instead we want to ensure that we are engaging with those already existing robust organizations. Additionally, food service professional organizations. So, you know, your National Restaurant Association, your food bank associations, all of those already have the networks available, and it just needs to be accessed in terms of sharing information. And then, of course, our food distribution organizations and our local pantries. So oftentimes where they need the most support is not necessarily the big food banks, but instead it's those local pantries that maybe want to be taking in different edible produce and cold storage needed food, but they just don't have the storage for it. So how can we support and engage with those organizations to see exactly what they need to support localized food recovery and food rescue? And then, of course, engaging with volunteer networks that are already in place, as well as those that distribute food throughout the state. And then branching out beyond maybe what we consider to be a food recovery organization, but, you know, our Chamber of Commerce and our business organizations throughout the state that have members throughout this system, but maybe haven't been engaging specifically speaking about food recovery and edible foods. And then lastly, some emerging groups that we've identified include the food recovery and rescue service providers. So these are nonprofit organizations mostly that have emerged in response to this need to feed people not landfill, but also in regards to SB 1383's requirements and how that kind of engages with and our service providers. Additionally, specialty food delivery. So this is something that's become much more popular, especially in urban areas, but you know, your HelloFresh, your Imperfect Produce, these things that are trying to use the digital space and delivery to kind of accommodate providing food to the public in a way that we haven't necessarily seen before. And then our community organizers and our activists, and maybe they're not completely organized or involved in food recovery, but everyone needs to eat, and everyone, you know, the first basic need is food. So how can we engage with those activists that maybe haven't been engaged in this space before? And I'd love to open this up to everyone else to include, if you see, you know what, we're completely missing a stakeholder group or organization that we really should think about, please let us know in the chat. And Casey and Julia, please feel free to jump in if I've missed anything.
Great. Do we have any questions? Nope.
Okay, I'm just looking in the chat.
We had a lot of conversation in the chat about different terms also being used. So I think I can save that for the Q&A session. So right now, if there are any questions that you've kind of been thinking of, put them in the chat box. I will kind of direct the questions or the conversation that had been going on in the chat box to the different subcommittees, and then any subcommittees that want to chime in. So I'll start off. There was a lot of conversation around definitions of food waste versus excess food versus excess edible food. And then towards the end, we started getting into conversations about using the term surplus food when we're talking about food donations and donatable food. That is something that maybe we can have a conversation with it looks like Patty and Lisa, if you want to take that and have and kind of address that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I can go ahead. I muted my video because I'm also having connection trouble, so I apologize. But yes, I think the message that we got is being very careful with language and semantics in defining food recovery, so that we are presenting the highest and best use of these resources, and not just displacement. So I think I noted down all of these different verbiages, and I think this is something we will want to discuss with any of you who would like to join our definition subcommittee, to really decide what language we should be using and share that out with everyone. I think the more consistent language we can all use, the better off we will be with these like regional programs and messaging that's applying across the board. So we're taking note of all your comments. Again, feel free to email us or respond in our survey about what future webinars, so that we can talk about this in one of our 4 webinar series next year, and really dive into what we've come up with. So thank you all for your input.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody.
Great. We have another question. We have a question for, it looks like for Annika, Casey, and Julia. Are the traditional groups meant to be prioritized over the secondary groups?
Yes, I can go ahead and field that question. Thank you, Gertrude, for asking it. So I want to be clear that no, absolutely not. The traditional does not necessarily mean that they're most important or prioritized. It's simply, we wanted to kind of think about what it is that we have historically thought of as the stakeholders involved in this conversation, but that doesn't mean that we only want it to these kinds of groups, right? So it was a way of organizing in terms of classification, but that does not mean that they should be the only ones, or that we should limit ourselves to traditional, secondary, or even emerging, right? It should be completely open to whoever we think should be involved in this conversation.
Great. So if anyone has some more questions, we have a little bit of time, I think, Lisa. So I can bring up some interesting comments that were going on in the chat room. We do have another question, actually. So what is the process for joining a subcommittee? How often are the subcommittees meeting? And if we can cover this in the Q&A.
So can I actually, before we answer that question in discussion, I actually have a polling option for that, so everyone can denote and we'll know if that's something that you're interested in. So let me share that. So are you interested in participating or learning more about any of these subcommittees? Anyone who's listening to this, you can select 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we will be able to see who said that. But I would also say that the general email is a great way to start, and let us know if you're interested in that. But I will let other members of the TC have more of a conversation about that process.
Yeah, I was going to say, please let us know by our main email box. If you know somebody that's in one of the subcommittees you want to join, please feel free to reach out to them, or take our follow-up survey about a subcommittee you would like to participate in. You do have to be a member of CRRA to officially join one of our subcommittees. Our quarterly webinars next year will be open to the public. However, to participate in the groups or our regular monthly meetings, you need membership. And then each group has their own schedule about when they'll be meeting, how they'll be meeting, what their goals and deliverables will be. So the best way to get connected to that, again, is just reach out to us generally or to one of the group leaders specifically, and we can get you more information.
So in other words, we're still working on it and we haven't really defined it yet. So yeah, some of the subcommittees might want to meet more often, some of them a little less. So that'll depend on the subcommittee and, like Lisa said, how much work and what they're trying to accomplish, right? Yeah. Any other questions, Rachel?
Yeah, there was another great question while Monica was speaking, Colleen Foster, franchise and rates are great ways to fund local programs and support city needs language and direction to do this. CalRecycle can be a great messenger. So it looks like it's a question referencing franchise and rates being great ways to fund local programs and cities maybe needing some language or direction to do this. Is this something that CalRecycle is looking at, or what is the process there?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Colleen. So hopefully everybody has been tracking that CalRecycle did deliver all their model tools. So within that, I think their franchise agreement has opportunities for cities to really define what might be included and not included within this realm. There was a lot of flexibility within the model tools, which was great. I think that this is such a new area that it's really going to be up to each city that is motivated to do this, to define it. I know on a personal work level, we've been working hard when we're approaching bids to wrap this into different franchise arrangements, as I said, in the competitive bid scenario. And then there's also a lot of healthy discussion about what happens when, you know, you have an organization, say like Stop Waste, that could be at a much higher regional level and sort of define this conversation at a very broad perspective. Or if you have, I'm living in Santa Barbara County, Santa Barbara is looking at a flow control arrangement where materials are all being brought to one central location for composting and management. Is there an arrangement where that county could take the lead in defining what funding sources could come through? But I do agree with you 100%, Colleen. CalRecycle should take, I mean, I'll say this, CalRecycle should be able to send out example language or examples that we're seeing in the field. I think CalRecycle is going to be very, very hesitant to say like this exact language is what you should be using, because they are always going to allow qualifiers and modifications depending on each jurisdiction's and regional's nuances, because franchise agreements are highly variable across the state. So I will say that.
Great, thank you. Colleen also mentioned a great point that there are CRRA scholarships and options to pay for memberships over time. So keep that in mind also for CRRA memberships. We have another question. Can you talk more about the quarterly webinars? Will they bring forward the findings of the subcommittees? This looks like maybe a question from Mauricio and Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is to be able to communicate as effectively as possible. And in lieu of any other questions, I think this is a great segue to our closing, which is basically what our goal is right here. What we have available to us is a committed and talented group who can help drive the direction we're going to go, not just in an area or a jurisdiction or a region, but in a much larger, broader scale. This is really going to be critical. You know, for someone like me who's a lifelong food industry person, we've waited for decades for this. And you are the right ones at the right time. Our goal is to get everybody involved, to really kick over every rock, identify every obstacle, overcome every challenge. So I would encourage you to take the follow-up survey that's going to come out. Meredith, they'll be sending that. I would highly encourage everybody to participate. This is your technical council. This is your opportunity to have an impact. We value everyone's input. And with that, again, I have to thank everyone who's been working on this, from Maurice to Meredith, or Mauricio to Meredith, to Lisa, to Rachel, to Tracy, everyone. You've done an amazing job. This is the first of many, and I sincerely hope you join us in the future. If there's any other comments, now's the time. If not, we're going to say goodbye. Anything else? Great. I think we're done for today. Everybody have a great rest of the afternoon. Drive safely to the next room, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
I will be posting, for anyone who's still on, I'm answering a question in the chat. I will be posting once we download the video recording, we'll upload that to YouTube, and that will be able to be emailed. It will be on our website on the CRRA website. So you'll be able to access it that way shortly.
Thank you, Meredith. And again, everybody, please reach out to us and we'll be more than glad to answer all your questions and comments. I know there's a lot of stuff to be go over on this. So thank you very much again. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.